All right, thank you, Shirag, and thank you everybody for joining this session. I think mostly for enjoying Teams Fest. Before joining today, I was just going through Twitter with the hashtag Teams Fest, and I could see that the excitement started a long time ago, many hours, and I know Shirag and the rest of the crew that are monitoring and managing the rooms, very active, very great to see, and honored to be a part of the crew, and really hope that you get a lot out of this session so that you can learn more about Microsoft Teams in the context of managing information. So the biggest focus for today is to really showcase the newest experience, the new Lists app in Teams, but really to land through broad and holistic value that it brings when you bring your information alongside that conversation where your team members are working, and not to have them leave the experience. So it might be a little weird. Hopefully you don't think you're in the wrong session because I'm starting in Planner, but if you'll see, I am in Teams. I'm on the Planner tab, and I did that intentionally just as a fun way to start off. But as you'll notice, I've set a to-do item for myself, and in this instance, I am Megan Bowen. But I set an instance for myself to have a task to present Microsoft Teams loves Microsoft Lists. So first of all, that's the session you're in. You have 7 other great choices, and I know that it's hard to choose one. I'm glad you chose this one, but just to make sure that's the one that you're here to see. And I know that it's not just a to-do, but it's actually a part of the Teams Fest. So I want to move it into the right bucket, and just note that I bet at the end of everybody's day, I'm just starting my day. But at the end of the day, there might be something like a SharePoint. So I've got a few tasks assigned for a SharePoint. And then just to look ahead at 2021, I've just got one task, which is get through 2020. All jokes aside, the session that we'll focus on here is all about Microsoft Lists inside of Microsoft Teams. And so I want to jump right into it. So my name is Mark Kashman. I'm a senior product manager on the Microsoft 365 marketing team. Holistically and historically, I focused a lot on SharePoint, OneDrive. I helped launch Office 365 Video before it was Microsoft Stream, and I've been involved in a lot in terms of collaboration. And the next level and phase for me, in addition to what I was doing before, is to be the product manager for Microsoft Lists. So it really, as you heard, if you were here earlier with Hans, he gave a little teaser, not only all the things about OneDrive, but some of the components with lists take the lead from where OneDrive was looking at things in a personalized view. I'll touch on that at the end because that's not quite within Microsoft Teams, but there's a lot of value in Microsoft Lists in how they are a part of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, tightly grounded in the SharePoint platform, but uniquely experienced directly inside of Teams. And that's where I'm going to spend the majority of time today explaining and showcasing. Just a couple of things to ground what are Microsoft Lists, or what is Microsoft Lists. They are an evolution of SharePoint lists. I do have a set of FAQs at the end, either based on questions that come up, or I can cover them because they are the most common questions I hear. But a lot of what we're doing to not only present lists to new users, but also bring forward our existing user base that have been using lists for years, is to simplify them, to make them easier to create lists, to make it easier to work with the lists, to make it easier to share and work with others. We want to make them smart. We've already had deep integration with the Power Platform, but there's some of the things we're doing native to lists that make them easy to add notifications or set alerts, make the list work for you, in addition to working with views, filtering, groups, sharing, all those notions, of course, move forward. And that final piece around flexibility is to give you the flexibility to customize what it is that you see, either based on status choices. There may be colors that change. There may be some columns that influence other columns when you make choices and change the data. But it also could be the forms themselves or the workflows on the back end. You certainly have the ability to customize those, whether you're using and staying within Teams, or if you want to further customize the forms using Power Apps, or the flows using Power Automate. Today's session will pretty much ground and solely stay within what's possible today within Microsoft Teams, but I can certainly address any questions about what might be coming in the future. One way that we look at broader portfolio within Teams is when you start a team in Microsoft Teams, you start working in channels, of course, working with other people. There are a lot of aspects of how you might manage different types of content. So I'm really walking through what types of content and how you can work within Microsoft Teams in that context of collaboration, getting work done. We have this notion of tasks. You saw that's where I started in Planner. I had a task assigned to me. I'm now actively doing that task. And it really is something where I can assign others a task or assign myself a task. But really it's that when I finish the task, complete it, I mark it completed, and I move on with my day. That is still trackable and auditable, but it's certainly away from my view and I'm on to the next task. When it comes to lists, where we'll spend the portion of the entirety of the session, it is to help you track your information, be it whether you're tracking issues, whether you're tracking physical assets, whether you're tracking FAQs, or like the Teams Fest team may have actually tracked all 85 sessions in a list so they could track who was the speaker, what was the abstract, what time slot was it in, what room, the link to the room, all the things that they could customize to collect the information per session would be very easy to manage in a list. And in fact, on the back end, when I got the information around where my room was and the other details that I provided around abstract and title, that was actually a list that they had created for us, the speakers, in Microsoft Teams as a tab. And that will be a thing that I say a couple of times because you will see it. You will see tracking and managing information in a list as a tab in Teams. But the broader portfolio sees it as another way to track information, especially when it's not a task or it's not a document. The other area is, of course, there's a lot of great ways to manage documents inside of Teams. Of course, it's on the backbone of SharePoint as the files platform. OneDrive is also on that files platform. If you were in the session before, you heard all about SharePoint from, I couldn't tell if it was Hans the bot that was presenting or if that was the real Hans, but maybe we'll find out in chat. But we know the real Hans, and probably to some great degree in the bot, provides a lot of great information about OneDrive. And in the notion of Teams, it is that files experience background that gives it that value and power so that you can do a lot of great things with content, documents. When it comes to communication, obviously in Teams, Teams is the center of gravity for a lot of conversations around and side by side the content. But it's also not to forget that there is a notion of all of these, whether it's a task, a document, or a file, or a list in Teams, that is something that you could also carry through into Outlook. The value would be that it's a link to the content, it's a link in the chat, it's a link in Outlook, so that it's always pointing back to that single source of truth, be it a list item, a task, or a document. We'll always make sure that it's not an attachment. So beyond that, this is conversation alongside content in the context of collaborative work management. We think this is a holistic portfolio, and if your primary entry point is Teams, we think you have a great experience of working with all that content. But really drilling down, and then we'll jump into seeing the product and taking questions throughout the session, is Lists loves Teams, or Teams loves Lists. It really adds to the value of how people work in this hub for teamwork and this platform that really gives you the ability to not only manage data, but to really track and manage and monitor your business. And when it comes to information, especially a lot of information that changes often and has a lot of people that need to interact with it, Teams is a great space to accomplish that, and Lists is a great way to bring that forward when you're tracking information, especially if you're adding some elements of rules, or like I mentioned, adding and customizing with the Power Platform. So this will run quickly. I promise that we'll give a lot of live demo, but just to give you a teaser into the experience, as you go into Teams, you can now create a list natively directly in Teams using the Lists app in Teams. And when you save it to start to create a new tab, you can choose between create a list or add an existing one. When you create, you can use a ready-made template. You just choose the template. You'll see a peek ahead of what the template brings in terms of the columns and the color structure. Give it a name, choose an icon and a color, and away you go. And obviously this drops you into a completed list that when you click into a list item, you can start a chat that connects it into a connected experience with that list item. So when somebody mentioned, like Alex here, when Alex gets notified, he can click into the item and it'll take him right here to this view, like you see Megan seeing. But from his perspective, he can now provide additional information in the chat. He can change the list items because he's a member of the team, and it's all that experience without having left Teams. That's the core value we see and some of the core experiences. But really, to move forward, I want to talk briefly about some of the values in terms of industry and in terms of the templates that we provide that I think lean into why and how would I use Microsoft Lists in Teams. When you go to create a new list, you'll see a number of templates that really for us are kind of a visual way to articulate what are the different scenarios. And if you're in one of these industries, we have even specific templates. Some of our templates are horizontal and can be used for a lot of different scenarios. But specific to industries, we've got a healthcare template. We've got one that's focused a little bit more around manufacturing, financial services, and for government. When you look into these, again, that value of being able to start quickly, configure to what is appropriate for your specific use case, and then further customize. We hope that the majority of people get a lot of value directly out of the box so that there isn't that need to configure or customize. However, of course, there is always that capability. So if you look across these industries as examples, when you drill in a little bit further and start to actually apply some of the templates that we have, and just to point out, the templates are the ones that are listed here where you see patients, loans, incidents, applicants, live site. These are some of the templates that you'll find in addition to our other more horizontal templates that give you a sense of what you might use them for. And so the example in the screenshot here just shows that under patients, you might have a patient's name, tracking their date of birth, some of the information that's tracked at the hospital level. And the intent here is for people like nurses and doctors and on through to the patients when they interact with them to be able to collect information, change the status, provide updates, and collaborate with each other in that specific environment that's built specifically for them. When you think of a more horizontal template, which is some of what I'll demo, it is really to provide a group of people the ability to collect and distribute information, to share and chat, and to use these templates as a quick start. Last slide before we jump into demo is just to give you a sense of what it looks like, and also to be a little transparent when we get to what is available today and what's coming soon at the end from a roadmap perspective. This is now in market. If you go to any channel in Teams, click a tab and choose the Lists app, you'll see that you'll be able to do everything that I will show you today. Some of the things that are coming are the ability to work with the Power Platform inside Teams. You're able to do that in SharePoint and bring in that list or do that work in SharePoint. And the same is true with some of the rules and some of the other features that are starting to roll out for lists outside of Teams, and bringing that capability is certainly part of the plan. So we are currently in Teams, so let me get out of the presentation and bring us back into our team here. So since we've started this, let me make sure that I now put this in progress, and I will move on to show you the experience of working with lists inside of Teams. So just visually, I just wanted to let everybody know I was presenting a PowerPoint inside of Teams. So I was already in Teams, but just to make sure everybody knows where I'm at now, I'm in that same Teams instance. This is just my demo account, and I've now moved to a specific team. And here I'm now in the general channel. So you've seen this a lot during the day if you've joined a lot of the team sessions within Teams Fest. But just to make sure you know where I'm jumping around, I'm no longer in slides. We're now in product, and it's just in full screen mode from a browser perspective. So starting here on post, certainly for me, it's a good morning Teams Fest. For a lot of you, it might be good evening, but either way, certainly appreciate you being here and your interest. I want to first just show a few examples of lists that have already been created and how you might use them and some of the things that you can do inside of Teams. So here I am in the list, and this is a list that has used an issue tracker as a template to give me a quick start to be able to create then a number of items, to be able to track their priority, to be able to adjust their status, to assign different people that might be associated with each item, to track a date when it was reported, and then based on that date, set a kind of a rule that says, show me how many days have expired since this was reported. Once a ticket gets created in the help system, to be able to link to that, that could be a link out to a very separate system. Easily in list, you can add a link to anything, and then tracking who actually logged that. So to show you the new create experience, this is just now a little bit different if you've ever used lists in SharePoint. Now the forms, especially within Teams, span, so you get the full breadth of being able to work with all the data. So I'm going to enter the new item here, and I'm just going to call out no issues with Teams Fest to date. Maybe Shirag, you can let me know if there have been any issues. Since there haven't been any issues, I'm just going to set this as normal. I'll put the status as in progress, and I'm going to assign myself on this one to take care of this. The date that it was reported was today. And again, if you had typed in anything, and I'll just put in, for the sake of hoping you can remember, Microsoft Lists Resource Center. That's an easy one. And you'll see how this renders. And typing while presenting is not my strength. And then I will assign and say that I log this as Alex Wilbur. Of course, this is just a generic out-of-the-box form. I could add a lot of fields, or if you think about it, add columns to do this. I could add attachments. When I save it down, just keep in mind, I was talking about Teams Fest. This is now a new item that shows up, and you'll see already that the priority and the in progress take on those color choices that I had already made. And to show you what that looks like, I'll go in and I'll show you the format of this column. And you can see that I chose choice pills, which means they get this rounded look. I could change the background colors if I wanted to edit each row. I want to also show you what it looks like to edit these choices. We now have a more streamlined experience, and this is true for lists all up, whether I'm in a SharePoint list that I've been using for years, whether I'm starting a list from the list's home experience, which I'll show you at the end just to ground the holistic breadth of where you can create lists from. But this is a new experience for the choice column. And as you can see, blocked, in progress, completed, map over to what you see here as choices I've made per each row. But I can go in and I can update the different colors that appear. I can obviously add different choices as they come about. I can choose a default. I can use calculated values, which help me add some smarts to my list. But you can see that it's a really easy experience, and everything that I've been doing keeps me within inside Teams. Last thing on a particular one, just do some simple operations. So I can filter, and if everything I wanted to see was to show me everything that was in progress, you'll see it filters quickly. I navigate directly into just the ones that I want to see. And actually I have a question on this particular one where I want to start a conversation. So I'll show this a couple of times because I think it's the most important thing around why you would manage list information inside of Teams. It's because it's a collaborative nature on the back end in terms of working and adjusting the information, but it also involves people, specifically in this case, team members of the freelance team working in the general channel. So similar how you saw the form spans the whole breadth of what you can see in Teams, I can easily in the upper right click conversation, and it opens up like you've seen in lots of demos, the content on the left, the conversation on the right. And if I mention, again, my friend Alex, I can ask him about this particular item. Can we move this deal to the cloud? And so when I hit return, that will send this into the post for this channel, and it'll notify Alex. So let me jump out of this particular session or list and show you as Megan. Here is that notification where Alex Wilbur would have gotten a notification in his chats. and then be able to address this question. And this next one is something that I'll just be real clear on what I'm doing, so that through this live event, this Teams meeting, you'll be able to see when I click on this, which is a link to a list item. That's pretty new, to be able to click directly into the list item and have that conversation automatically show up. So if I was Alex responding to this, I could review the information. If there was something that I needed to update, maybe I wanted to change this from in progress to by design, and then provide some feedback, I could do it. You can see that that information got updated, and if I go back to the list, you'll be able to see that that deal in the cloud is now adjusted to by design. The color changes, and all is good. Last thing, just so you know, if you've worked with lists before, of course, you can do things like group by status. You can also change the views if you've put in different views where you want to see issues grouped by priority. This is a standard view that's been created. I can click into that and it'll change my view. And those are a lot of things that you can create. You can create your own views, and I'll show you certainly how to do that when we get started on a fresh list. Last thing you saw is if I'm in all items, you now see a new button, which we started to roll out this month as a new update to lists everywhere. But it used to be what I used to show that what we called modern lists a number of years ago were actually real lists. And I think it helps to pull forward. If you've used lists before, you really see that the value and power of lists comes to Teams. This used to be a button that said quick edit. And we've just started to convert this to read edit in grid view, because we're starting to describe this, and we got a lot of feedback that this is really more of a grid view of my list. And we also have gallery view, and we have now calendar view that are rolling out. But if I go into edit in grid mode, again, just a way to prove that this is truly an easy way to go in and edit in bulk. I'll show you that. Let's say that these two items were similar and they were tied to the same ticket. Even though this is a hyperlink, I can do a quick drag fill and it'll automatically populate that cell with that ticket information and start to change. If I wanted to do a quick assignment where I wanted to assign my friend Patty to a different item, I could also drag and drop, and you can see that that item got updated with her information and is also being updated to the list itself. So I could go in quickly and I can add new items in grid mode. I can now add new columns. If I wanted to add a new yes/no column, I can do that. And it's very easy to do everything that you would expect to do with lists right in line with within Teams. And to the extent of just showing you the value of being able to do a fill across all items, we'll do halfway and make these all yes. And you can see on the left, if you saw there was a little circle indicator that some action was taking and storing the information on the back end. Now it's up to date, and when I exit grid view, you can see that that new column appears, the information that I changed is intact. And for any next member or people that were collaborating near or real time would see this information and of course expect to interact with it. So this is one example. Another example is if you're tracking assets. This actually uses the asset manager, and this is like a template that I showed just briefly. Started with a predefined set of columns, the expectation that there would be an image. So when I click into here, you'll see that the form populates with all the information in addition to the image itself, which is pretty small in the context of when I'm in full mode, it kind of gives me a funny, let me get right back to where I needed to go. You have the ability to track images. Of course, you can track all sorts of information. And the same is true for, even if I didn't start out with a template, I can add an image column. Again, if you look at all the different columns. But this is a way, excuse me, where you can quickly and easily navigate to the information, start a conversation, and even share a link to these distinct items. If you wanted to copy a link to a particular list item, similar to how we shared in a chat, you can see that you can share at the list level and you can share at the list item level. So if I wanted to start a chat or share it with another person that had permissions to this list, I could do it outside of this particular channel, and make sure, similar to how you manage content with documents, you probably saw Hans talk about the value of how you share with documents. That carries over with how you can share list items. Not only is it possible to send a link directly to a list item, but you can also choose directly the capabilities that they have when they land and how you share the link. So in this case, I wanted to share it with people within my company. This is a fairly open general team, but I don't want to allow them editing. So when they get to this list, they would see the list information, but they wouldn't be able to edit it. Pretty common in terms of our sharing experience throughout Microsoft 365, but a ton of value of how it comes to lists, and specifically that it carries through to the list inside of Teams. So I'm going to show you one other example, but first, before I show you one that's been a little bit more configured with the Power Platform, is what is the getting started experience? What does that look like? So I've clicked the common plus button in any channel so that you can add a tab. And you can add a tab like any other. Of course, this shouldn't look any different from a lot of the demos and your experience using Teams. But within the tab experience now, to add a tab, you can choose the new Lists app. And if you've used this previously in a beta perspective, this is refined a little bit to simplify how it works. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating and starting a list. And to talk about what actually happens when I go to create a list, and as you see here, one of the choices I have is to add an existing list. And just to be frank, when I show you this last list example, it is one that I had to do a little bit of tweaking in SharePoint. So I created it in SharePoint, but I created it in the same connected team site that's connected to this freelance team, and then brought it in by choosing add an existing list. But I want to show you what it's like to create a new list, something that's never been possible before this recent update to the Lists app in Teams. I have some of the same choices. I can create a list from blank. And in fact, this is one of my favorite templates because you can literally do whatever you want. There's also a ton of value in bringing data from Excel tables. So you can do that. That's something that we had in SharePoint, carries through to how you may start a list in Teams. Or you can benefit from the value of an existing list. And what this does, it doesn't transfer the data. It transfers the column structure. It transfers the color schemes and the choices you made in things like choice fields and the color spectrum that I showed you. But it also will bring forward into when we release it, things like rules and forms, so that if you've customized and utilized another list and you know that you have another scenario that has that same use case, you can benefit a ton by using the smarts of another list, but not the data itself. For this example, I wanted to show you, I think, something that probably is very useful in the context of what we're seeing with Teams Fest, the ability to manage an event at scale, especially in the early phases before the day of the event, to track sessions and the different codes and the different people that are interacting with it. But before I create use template, before I click use template, I want to give you a sense of what we do in before you create the template, to give you a sense of what the template can do. So this is, it looks like a completed template, but it really is just a peek ahead of what are the column structures going to be, what are the color spectrums and some of the choices by default that will be there that I can choose from. And as I click around to a couple of other templates, you'll see you get a little bit of a title, a little description, and then of course a visual look at how does this particular template work? What will it give me? Does it meet the criteria of what I need to track the different type of information that I'm trying to accomplish here? So there are a lot of templates, and some of them are unique to Teams, and I mentioned them earlier around tracking incidents, tracking patients, and tracking loans. Those are our industry-specific templates. But a little bit more specific and similar to what we're doing here at Teams Fest, I'm going to create an event itinerary. So when I click to use this, I'm going to choose this as Teams Fest 2020. And because we're all about Teams, we're going to use some of the Teams color. And because in the previous session, we're just learning about Hansbot, we're going to choose the robot here to create our template. That is the icon that will be associated with it, and you'll see it when you go to your list home, and I'll show you what that looks like. But obviously, this is now just a blank template that has smarts behind it that are just waiting for me. And I'm really just going to fill out one item and then keep moving through the rest of the presentation. But so that you can see if we wanted to talk about my session and just fill it out here, Microsoft Teams. And this is one of my favorite things. If you didn't know, within Windows, you can click the Windows key plus the period, and that'll bring up an emoji filler, and that lists and Teams supports emoji is one of my favorite things. So this is the name of the session. I'll correct that in line, and I'll be real brief just to give this a session code. This is a breakout session. The keynotes are just after this, so definitely stay tuned. I could fill out my name as speaker, the start date being today, and for me, 9 a.m., so I'll just mark that as just a quick set of information. I'll give it an end date, and then we will move on just so that you can see some of what then gets created automatically for me. And we'll say that we're currently at the capacity of Teams 350, and we'll say that I'm coming to you live from Redmond. When I save this down, similar as you saw me before, it's going to automatically pick up some of the color formatting that was there with the choice field. When I chose breakout, it automatically calculated that the session started at 9, ended at 9:40, so the duration is 40 minutes. The room capacity is 350, and I could set a threshold as an owner of this list to show that as a progress looking field. So if I had said something as 100, it would look about half empty. And if I wanted to, I could color code as much as I want, adjust the form how I wanted to, and as I mentioned, there's a couple of other things that you can do in outside of Teams. But if you get a sense of how you can start quickly leveraging a template, the last thing I want to do here is, just because I really like the Teams Fest logo, we'll add that and just even further refine how we want this list to appear in Teams. So I promised the last part of this demo was to show you some of the things that you can accomplish with lists, but maybe a couple of actions that you do outside of Teams. Once they're complete and designed or built, you can bring it into Teams like I show here. And the one thing that's a little bit extreme about this particular list is it uses a lot of the same things that I showed you in how you can build your lists, how you can color code, how you can leverage images, the different ways that you can stylize and format. And I'll show this here because I think it's a really unique part of how you can make the list really your own. But the real valuable thing is when I click into one of these items, the form should look really different to you. And to expand on this so you can see a little bit more, which is another one of my favorite features in Teams, is this expand button. And it works great, especially when you track a lot of columns on a list. This is actually a form that we've further customized using Power Apps. And the Power Apps designer gives you the capability to pull from the list itself, to pull from other data sources. Like you see here on the right, this is actually a live Power BI dashboard that's then brought into this Power Apps form, but it's really just the form for the list that's been customized. It takes that existing image in the image column, makes it a little bit bigger, and it takes an action where there is this ability to review this information. And if you were assigned or somebody mentioned you to ask you to review the information and approve it, in this scenario, it would be to approve the storefront, that it looks good and it looks like it's really promising in how it's promoting some of our new surfboards and some of our new clothing line for this particular season. Addition to that, I can see that some of the things that are trending in the actual invoice, this is pulling from a worksheet in Excel. So Power Apps gives you that capability to bring together and customize the form with even information from beyond the list. But the value is, for most of the users who aren't designing the form, can come in and get their work done in Teams, even for things that are a little bit beyond the out-of-box template, the out-of-box form, or just that out-of-box experience. It's within reach to be able to do just a little bit of customization if you know Power Apps, or have somebody that can do the work to then bring it inside Teams to have a great experience, to go in, review information, and then click approved. Once that's done, that has a workflow on the back end that triggers a signal to then approve, to get those assets, to then design and update that storefront when appropriate. So if I exit out of this and navigate back, I want to go back into my planner board, which disappeared on me, but I'll bring it back. And we'll go back into the presentation and finish up with just a few more slides and then some time for Q&A. And then certainly get ready for all of the keynotes to come. So let me do just a little recap, just to explain a little bit about what you saw. I'll be quick here because I want to make sure we get through any questions that arise. But the experience that you saw me drill into here is creating, using, and sharing, and of course, conversing around lists and list items directly inside Microsoft Teams with the value and power. If you've used lists before, you already know what you can do with lists, but also carrying forward, especially to a lot of people who are new to lists, to be able to track a different, unique type of information easily, directly within Teams, and converse and chat with your team members to make sure to get work done. It's also possible, like I showed, to do this at the list item level, which is usually what you're trying to accomplish when you're calling out the need for change or something to be updated. When you look at kind of the feature set, if you want to drill into a little bit more of what did I show you, and maybe some open questions of can it do this, can it do that, if you know lists pretty well. One of the things I didn't talk about, it's a little bit harder to show in a virtual sense. On the right-hand side, you see a video running that is actually the lists experience inside of the Teams mobile application. So everything that I showed you, if you've added a tab, a list as a tab in Teams, like you can navigate to any tab in the Teams mobile app, now we have a really great new experience for when you navigate to the tab that's a list inside the Teams mobile app. So that's what you see running here on the right-hand side. And as you see, it's doing a lot of what I showed you. You can add mention, you can comment, you can use a lot of the capabilities of working with lists inside of Teams, even when you're on the go. Pull your eyeballs a little bit to the left, and it really is just a summary of all the capabilities of what you can do with lists, the work that we have done to make sure that you have a great way to track information and work with your team. As you add a list as a tab, you can work with existing lists, you can create new lists, you can work with pre-made templates, you can import from Excel. You get a great updated experience even on existing lists. You can sort and filter, you can do all the valuable, powerful things to create the experience to make the list work for you, especially when you're in this mode of working with others. Some of the things to come that are just at the bottom here is the ability to create a list based on a trigger inside of Teams. That's something that we're working on, to be able to generate a new list even in a programmatic mode, and this ability of being able to create a space or a new environment directly around the list items, so that if you needed to take that further and add a little bit more rigor than just the list item itself. I also mentioned that we have rules. Rules are simple sentence-like structures where you can pull and create notifications and alerts based on changes on a list. And that capability is coming. It's just not there yet. So think of this as kind of the what's already shipped and a few things to come, with a look into what you can do from a mobile perspective. I do want to leave a list of resources. They're certainly long and they will be in the deck, easier to grab. But there is a lot of information around how you can manage the lists app in Teams, like any other app in Teams. There's end user documentation. We have our lists resource center. We have a new blog that we announced, a couple of new features that are coming to lists that of course will flow into the capabilities within inside of Teams. One of the big announcements at Ignite was this capability that we hope to bring by end of year, is to be able to take your lists offline. So everything I was showing you there, working with lists, filtering, grouping, adding new items, creating new information, I could do that in an offline mode, and all of that would get then carried forward into the cloud once I'm connected, and for also other low latency environments, it helps with the performance so that you can work with lists at the speed of your brain, at the speed of how you work with others. All the information that we released back in May and have been carrying forward and starting to release out into production is all listed out on the Microsoft 365 public roadmap. And my last plug here is I co-host a podcast for Microsoft called The Intrazone, where we talk about all the things that you can do with inside your intranet from a collaborative perspective, from an employee engagement perspective, and we have a couple of unique episodes directly with Microsoft lists, all with the engineering teams in how they've built and designed what you can do with lists. And if you like podcasts, the Intrazone is a great place for me to be able to share with the community all throughout the year. We get a lot of great feedback on topics and things of interest, and we try to maintain that so that you get a great experience of keeping up to date and keeping ahead of this ever-changing environment with lots of new features, capabilities. But I think for events like this, the most important thing is training and best practices and questions answered, which really leads me to turn to answering any questions. Chirag, I will ask you if there are any specific questions that you saw come through. I hope that the biggest takeaway is that you can do this today. I hope you try it within your own tenant, create a list, give it a try some of the templates, create from scratch. There's a lot of things that you can do to track information, especially when it comes to that in a collaborative nature. I'll click through here. I'd love to hear what you think about this session, what you think about the product and the capabilities. And while we take questions, this is my cheat that I mentioned earlier, the common questions that I get around lists, and some of this applies to lists in Teams. I will answer questions offline directly in the chat, knowing that I know people are going to prepare and get into the other rooms, and I will mention you for the person that asked the question. But again, Chirag, was there anything specific that you saw that wasn't addressed?
Yeah, kind of. So there were some common themes. Firstly, great presentation, and yeah, much better than to just read the content and see it for live and real. So yeah, we had a couple of themes, and there was the themes around database versus the tables, and you see the rich tables, the rich Microsoft lists, and some kind of a dashboard summary view. So there's obviously that the age-old argument around databases versus flat web tables. Are you able to add some clarity around that in terms of when to use Microsoft lists versus something like Project Oakdale and other tech?
Yeah, I kind of think of it as asking yourself what it is that I'm trying to accomplish, and maybe what skill set I have or is required to create the end result. If it's something that's as simple as a task management you saw me working within Planner, if it really is just a set of tasks, I would encourage you to think about To-Do or Planner. If you're tracking information that's meant to last a long time, but is very simplified in terms of it's really based on a standard flat structure you saw working in columns. It doesn't have the requirement to be a relational database, and it maybe doesn't require anything specific that you can't do out of the box. List is very targeted at the skill set of an information worker. Really anyone, we think, should be able to create a list, manage it, add the information that they want to track. But if it gets to that level where you're going to really highly customize it and require Power Apps beyond the form itself, where you maybe want to create a distinct application, leveraging something like Project Oakdale, or leveraging lists as a back-end data source and taking that into Power Apps, it may be that you have an existing list that you then want to further customize, be able to start wherever you need to. But I think thinking in terms of Project Oakdale, if you are building a business application that's going to be built on the Power Platform, knowing that you want to heavily or moderately have a customized form and a custom experience, or connect already directly with Power Automate, there is that unique ability that the way that Project Oakdale works is assuming that there will be a relational database, meaning you can span beyond the flat structure and possibly pull in from multiple tables and multiple locations. So it really, I think, is a pivot of skill set, where you started, and really ultimately, what are you trying to accomplish? We have a lot of great ready-made templates for lists, and that's a great place to start.
I mean,
if you
there
need
was a
some further
specific scenario.
customization. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
No, I was just going to say, so there was a specific scenario around a regular database export as a CSV file.
Yep,
So, typically, first off, you can, create a Microsoft list from that exported CSV file that comes from the database. So the
correct.
question was more around the regular updates. I can think of Power BI and, constantly query a Excel
Yeah,
file that comes and updates. But something like that in Microsoft lists, is that doable? Is that something
yeah.
in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of ways. If you think about it, you can bring in data from Excel if that's where it originated, but maybe it's more collaborative and you need to track it in a little bit of a different way, especially creating rules or something like a workflow. Once it's in the list, we do have the ability to export back into Excel, which gives you the ability to then further analyze and possibly just review the data and create a little bit of a dashboard. To be real clear, it's a one-way export so that every time you go into Excel, it's always going to pull the data from the list and you can refresh it at any time. But the changes, if you were to think to make an Excel, that does not push back to the list. However,
Yeah.
always if you can make it to Excel, you can make it to Power BI, and it could be something where you could build a Power BI data model or a dashboard off of a list and have that same notion of refreshing the data based on what's in the list, where most people will update the information and provide that dashboard or analysis through either Excel or Power BI. That's certainly supported. It's a
Yeah.
key feature with lists, and we hope a lot of people do that.
Sure. No, that's great. And I think we had one question around
Mhm.
how do we delete lists?
How you
Uh,
delete lists.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's the same as you would really delete anything in SharePoint. One of the questions that we often get is, are SharePoint lists going away, or where does the content get stored? So when I created that new event list for
Yeah.
Teams Fest, even though I was in Teams, it was getting created in SharePoint,
Yeah.
which means it's a list in the connected team site. So if I wanted to delete it, I would go into SharePoint, go into site contents,
Yes.
and then from there, if I have the capabilities to get to that level of that team site, I can select it and delete the list from the site contents.
Sure.
And then, of course, it won't be available to view within Teams. And the last thing that you might do is, of course, remove that tab so that it's not a bad experience for
Yeah.
the next person.
True. Sure. Good, great.
Yeah,
Well, I think that's about it. Once again, many, many thanks for being here at Teams Fest, and also to the attendees for taking up. And some of the attendees have been on this track throughout the day, so really appreciate. And it's from my perspective, certainly a lot of content for training, best practices, tips, and everything. So really thanks to all of you for making Teams Fest happen. And so we do have a more sessions, the keynotes now, kind of starting on the hour. So I'm just going to share my screen very
yeah.
quickly.
I'll do it.
Um, yeah, so just want to say, thanks, Mark, for your efforts and, some great questions there as well. And obviously posting those links will only clarify the tech further. And so with that, I'll just like to say thank you and kind of, bid goodbyes to everybody and hopefully see some of you at some online events sometime soon. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Thank you for supporting Chirag, and thank you everybody for attending. If you have questions, please continue to put them in the chat before you head out to the keynotes, and hope that you enjoy your next time that you're in Teams trying out lists. It's a great new experience, but thank you for your time.
great. Thanks. Thanks all.